Such a beautiful Saturday morning. Hi everyone. So I would like to kindly invite all of the participants to take your seat first as we will begin shortly, very shortly. แล้วก็สำหรับทุกท่านนะคะที่เข้าร่วมกิจกรรมในวันนี้ค่ะเราจะดำเนินซิมโพเซียมเป็นภาษาอังกฤษตลอดกิจกรรมนะคะเพราะฉะนั้นท่านใดต้องการเครื่องแปลภาษาสามารถนำบัตรประชาชนไปรับได้ที่บริเวณด้านหน้าห้องค่ะ For today's symposium we're going to run the program with English throughout the day. So I tell all the Thai people who cannot understand English, so you can bring your ID card and have an exchange for the translation device in front of the hall. Okay, so please take your seats and we're going to begin shortly. I think it's all settled now. So I would like to begin with the officially hello to you all. Good morning, everyone. Distinguished guests, speakers, and also our panelists and scholars. Welcome you all to the International Academic Symposium, Tang Chang, Reading Tang Chang. My name is Kem Apson Suwanarat and I will be your host for today's program. On behalf of the organizer, the Tang Chang Private Museum and the Education Department of the Bangkok Art and Culture Center, it is our great pleasure to have you all here today with us. This symposium will invite you all to reconsider how we study an artist, not simply through the biography or a fixed narrative, but through a more dynamic, critical engagement with their works, their context, and intellectual legacy. So to officially begin today's program, I would like to invite Dr. Adulaya Hundragoon, the director of the Bangkok Art and Culture Center, to deliver the opening remarks to you all. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Adulaya on the stage, please.
Good morning, distinguished scholars, esteemed colleagues, honored guests and dear friends. Thank you for spending your morning with us. It really is my pleasure to welcome you to the Bangkok Art and Culture Center. This gathering really embodies a core commitment for us. We function not only as an exhibition space, but also a platform for knowledge exchange. We strive to be a space where art is presented to a diverse group of audience, and ideas get critically examined, where scholars, artists, and the public engage in meaningful dialogue. So in this regard, today's symposium is not simply peripheral to our mission, but it's really its realization. As RMC said a minute ago, that the central question guiding this program is how should we study an artist? This invites critical methodological reflection. It encourages us to move beyond the biographical conventions and the canonical affirmations, prompting conversation of the artist situated within dynamic networks of history, language, and social relations. The symposium advances the proposition by highlighting not only the artist and his work, but only the conditions under which his legacy is preserved, how it's interpreted, and thus activated. On this occasion, I'd like to extend my sincere congratulations to the team at the Tang Chang Private Museum and the managers of the artist estate. Their work is both rigorous and generous, demanding care, responsibility, critical insight, and most of all, a long-term vision. Stewardship of an artist's legacy is never a neutral task. It is an active process of constant interpretation with precise organization and an active public engagement such as these activities. So through their dedication, Chang Setang's work is not only preserved, but also it gets to be meaningfully reintroduced into contemporary discourse. And this symposium serves as a testament to their commitment. We are honored to host an outstanding group of speakers and participants today whose contribution will offer multiple perspectives on the artist and its broader significance. So finally, I wish to express my sincere gratitude to our collaborators and supporters whose commitment has made this symposium possible. I also thank each and every one of you for your presence and participation. Your engagement transformed this gathering into a vibrant space of inquiry. I wish you all a stimulating and enriching symposium. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, for your inspiring remarks to opening our symposium. We will now begin our program with a presentation titled Management of the Artist Estate by our program curator, Kun Nawapu Satang, the program curator of today's symposium and the director of the Tang Chang Private Museum. So please join me in welcoming him on the stage, please.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nawapu Satang. I serve as a director of the Tang Chang Private Museum and the director of the Tang Chang Estate. It is a great pleasure and honor to welcome you all to this symposium, which also marks an important moment for us, the opening of the Tang Chang Private Museum. Today, I would like to begin with a simple proposition. An artist does not exist in the art world through artwork alone. An artist exists through knowledge. And this belief is, in many ways, the foundation of how we have approached the management of the Tang Chang estates. The symposium, therefore, is not only an academic gathering. It is part of the infrastructure of the estate itself. Because for us, research, discussion, and interpretation are not secondary activities. They are central to the survival of the artist in history. If we go back to the beginning, when Tang Chang passed away in 1990, he left behind an enormous body of work, paintings, writings, concrete poetry, and archives, tens of thousands of pieces. But what he didn't leave behind was a system. There was no institutional framework, no management model, and no clear roadmap for what an artist estate in Thailand should look like. What existed instead was responsibility. In the first phase, the task was simply to preserve, to keep everything, to prevent loss, to hold together what could have easily been dispersed. This act, although not systematic at the time, was critical because it allowed the collection to remain intact, and more importantly, it preserved the possibility of future knowledge. As time passed, we began to move from the preservation to reflection. Around the early 2010s, particularly after the exhibition in 2013, we began to ask a more structured question. What do we actually have, and what can we do with it? At this stage, we introduced a very basic but important tool, SWOT analysis. We assess our strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. This process of self-assessment was crucial because it forced us to move from simply taking care of works to actually thinking about strategy. From this, we began to develop a more structural approach to managing the estate. We gradually articulated our work into three main areas: research, institutions, and market. The first is research. We believe this is the most important foundation. Without research, there is no interpretation. Without interpretation, there is no meaning. And without meaning, there is no place in history. This is why we actively work with scholars, researchers, and institutions to produce knowledge about Tang Chang through academic writing, exhibitions, and platforms such as this symposium. This is also why access to archives is so important. The materials we preserve, artworks, writings, documents, are not just objects. They are sources of knowledge, and it is through research these materials are activated. The second area is institution. Our goal has been to situate Tang Chang's work within museum context because museums do something very important. They make works visible, they make them accessible, and they make them part of a larger conversation. Over the past decade, we have worked toward placing Tang Chang's work in international exhibitions and museum collections, not simply for visibility, but for long-term sustainable in terms of knowledge production. At the same time, we also recognize the importance of having our own institution. This is why the Tang Chang Private Museum was established. It is, in a way, a small institution, but it allows us to take responsibility for how the work is presented, studied, and understood. It becomes a space not only for exhibition, but for research, dialogue, and experimentation. The last area is market. This is sometimes the most difficult to discuss, but it is essential. As a small estate with limited resources, we cannot rely solely on institution or academic support. The market, when approached carefully, becomes a mechanism of sustainability. It allows us to generate resources that can support research and institutional development. At the same time, it requires careful management. Not all works should enter the market in the same way. We must consider how to group works, how to assign different roles to different parts of the collection, and how to align these decisions with our broader mission. In this sense, the market is not a goal, but it is a supporting structure. These three areas, research, institution, and market, are not separate. They are interdependent. Research builds knowledge. Institutions disseminate that knowledge, and the market support both. Together, they form a framework through which an artist's legacy can be sustained. Today, as we open the Tang Chang Private Museum and host this symposium, we would like to propose something quite simple. Even with limited resources, it is possible to manage an artist estate in a systematic way. But this requires a shift in perspective. We must move away from thinking of artworks as isolated objects and begin to see them as a part of a larger ecosystem of knowledge. And importantly, this knowledge should not remain private. As an estate, we believe that part of our responsibility is to share not only the artworks, but also the knowledge, the research, and even the know-how of how we manage them. Because in the future, many other artists, families, and small institutions will face similar challenges. And perhaps what we are building here can contribute in some way to a broader conversation. To conclude, this symposium is not just about Tang Chang. It is about how we construct artist legacy. It is about how knowledge sustains that legacy. And it is about how collectively, through research, institutions, and shared practices, we can ensure that artists continue to exist, not only in memory, but in history. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kun Navapu. That's such an insightful presentations. So next, we're going to have a presentation on Tang Chang inventory projects, artworks, archives, and writings by the researcher from the Tang Chang Private Museums. So we're going to have Cheryl Gui and Kun On Pimon Im Samran to share with us about that research. So please join me in welcoming her on the stage, please.
Hello. Okay, hi, good morning everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here today on Saturday. Firstly, I would like to extend my gratitude to BACC for hosting this gathering, and thank you so much to the estate for inviting me here to share about Tang Chang's inventory project. So, as the title of this presentation suggests, the project consists of 3 segments: the artworks, the archives, and the writings. Over here. So over the course of 1.5 years, I had the incredible opportunity to document nearly 9,000 of Tang Chang's artworks together with the help of my colleague here today, Ms. Onpimon Imsamran, also known as Pet. And so the first segment of the project, the artworks, was completed in November 2025. Pat is currently leading the second segment of the project, the archives, while preparations are underway for the third segment, the writings. And while we have adopted different archival conventions for each segment of the project, they remain closely interrelated, and part of our task was to draw connections between them. So now I will pass the time to Pat to introduce the archives first before I'll move on to the artworks later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl, and hello, everyone. Let me introduce myself again. My name is Onpimon Imsamran, but you can call me Pet. I am responsible for the archival documentation for this database. Before I hand things over to Cheryl, who will explain the artwork, documentation, and the further details of our project, I would like to introduce the progress on the archival material segment. We recently began this phase after completing the works of art last year. I should mention at the disclaimer that the archiving process is still ongoing, and many of the criteria we have established now may change in the future. Just as artworks, artists, or various pieces of objects always seem to slip through the cracks whenever we try to define them. And there is the public side of our database. Okay, you will notice the top navigation bar clearly separates the works of art and archival materials. Currently, I have already recorded a portion of the archive held by the estate, the majority of which consists of photographs and newspaper. I am now working alongside our new staff member, Ton Nam, to input the letters and correspondence. Regarding accessibility, we will only be granting partial public access. This is because some records do not just involve Tang Chang's family, but also other individuals mentioned or involved in those documents. For example, letters between the artists and friends or students often contain private conversation or reference to a third person. Likewise, sales records and personal notes may contain sensitive contents. In these instances, the records will be set to private, and in some cases, access may only be granted on-site. Other policies will follow the mutual agreements between users and the estate. Okay, no, it's not there. Can you help me? Okay. Next, I will show you how we record archives and the various fields that are essential for searching. Starting with the accession number, as you can see on the screen. The archive accession numbers begin with the letter-based code. It starts with A for archive, followed by a letter indicating the content type, which we will discuss later. Next is a 4-digit code representing the year the item was created. For objects with unknown or ambiguous dates, we use 00, 001, or 002, similar to the system used for the artworks. The final one is a code indicating the item's order within that specific type of content. For instance, the number shown on the screen can be listed as archival documentation in the photograph category, where P stands for photographs, and it is a 9th photograph recorded that was taken in 1970. This ordering number will continue to run chronologically based on our documenting. Okay, thank you. You have to point at the TV. I think, okay. Next, you can see the types of content we have roughly categorized based on the evidence we have found so far. Some categories still have ambiguous definitions and require case-by-case considerations. On the screen it shows the content filters for the public site, which allow you to instantly browse items based on your interests. The content types are as follows. Artwork by other people. This is a work created by people other than the artist. Example, include a painting by Japanese artist Tachima Seiso, given as a gift to Tang Chang, or drawings by the artist's children kept by the descendants. Books, name cards. This some belonging to a visitor to the artist's house or attached to letters. Documents. This cover everything from conservation records to official government documents such as birth and death certificates for the artist or his family. Exhibition paraphernalia, archival objects related to exhibitions, and we will later distinguish between exhibitions directly related to Tang Chang and those that are not. Journals. This code also includes articles published in magazines, newspapers, and also letters and postcards. The artist's personal notes. Photographs include negatives, color slides, and hand parentheses. The artist's sketches, some of which serve as a preliminary studies for his completed artworks. Transcription of the artist's lecture given on various occasions. Audio visuals such as CDs, DVDs, and cassettes. Writings by others, which is the text written by other people, such as students recording Tang Chang's working style or teaching, as well as poems written by the artist's students while they were staying at the artist's house. And miscellaneous. This is other types of objects that do not fit into the categories mentioned above. To show how we documented the archives, here is an example of a documented photograph. We will see several fields, starting with the accession number, which follows the format we established. This specific example is a photograph of the artist sitting by the door of Sampaya Shrine, where he painted the door gods. Our record includes title of the items, if one was given, language. This field is mostly used for written materials like letters and publications. Dates of creation. This date, the date the item was produced. Creator. For photographs, this refers to the photographer. For written materials, this is the author of the article or letter. Next is the scope and contents, where we describe the content of the documenting item or provide a summary and what it is related to. Extent and physical description. It details the physical characteristic of the objects, such as whether it is in color or black and white, the number of copies and number of pages. Dimensions. The measurements recorded are used to access the required storage space. Content type. We specify this based on the criteria mentioned earlier. These fields are clickable, allowing you to view other items categorized under the same content type. Sort of publication. This provides the bibliographic reference for printed matters, which I will show you later. Current location and keywords, which has some of these with the works of art segment. For example, as you can see, the keywords door gods link back to the painting created by the artist for the child dolls. The most significant part of the archival record is at the very bottom, highlighted here in the red box. We have interlinked other related items directly to this photograph. The two items linked to the photograph from the previous page are the two images to your left right now. One of them is a recorded artwork, the Door of Sampaya Shrine in the Hong San district, which the artwork painted himself in the early 1960s. Next to it, in the center, is a painted image of the same door gods seen on the shrine doors. On the actual objects, there are pencil marks forming a grid pattern over the image. This can be interpreted as the artist's way of scaling proportions, using these pins as a reference image for his painting on the shrine doors. Both of these items are linked to the photograph of the artist sitting beside his work, which serves to confirm his ownership. Next is an example of a specific function that demonstrates the connection between each archival material. In this case, we have the same photograph printed in various sizes. Some copies have the year written on the reverse, while others do not. In instances like this, we link each piece together under the same extraction number, as the core content of these items is the same. Returning to the connection between the two sections, works of art and archival materials, another clear example is how every artwork appearing in a photograph is connected within the archive record. The connection could be interpreted as a dated photograph helping us estimate the creation year of an artwork. For instance, if a work appears in a photo from 1970, it might have been created no later than that year. In this specific example, based on interviews with the artist's descendants, this photo captures the early period when Tang Chang began exhibiting his works in his own house. It reveals the types of pieces he chose to display, while simultaneously reflecting his perspective on which work he considered ready or worthy for public exhibition. Furthermore, it reveals how the artist categorized his work or arranged his display. Next is an example of how we record the sort of publication. In cases where an article features the artist's painting, we can find the details in these bibliographic entries. These follow the same format used in the bibliography of printed matter or all known reproduction views, which Cheryl will show you when she explains the artwork segment. In this specific example, a caricature of Tang Chang publishes in the Thailand newspaper. We have provided complete reference data from the author's name to the publication date. For Thai or other non-English publication, we provide an English translation and include a language tag for clarity. Finally, here is an example of a clickable fuse. I have provided two examples here, specifically for related exhibitions. If you click on this view, the system will display every archival material associating with that particular exhibition. As you can see on the screen, these photographs were taken during the opening ceremony of the Tang Chang's Institute of Modern Arts in 1985. The same function applies to the content type and any other clickable fields. Regarding the image of the identification book shown here, although the extension number is AD, we have also assigned it a photograph because it contains photo of the artist inside. These criteria were initially developing in consultation with Cheryl before her return to Singapore. We are continually refine them as we possess our extensive archive, which requires almost entirely new categorization. From here, I will now hand things over to Cheryl.
Thank you so much, Pat. Okay. So for my section of the presentation, I have three goals. Firstly, to introduce the artworks database and take you through some of the considerations and issues we faced when we were designing the architecture of the system. Secondly, I wish to demonstrate how the data we have collected can serve art historical interpretation. And thirdly, as we look back on some of the challenges that we faced in developing this project, we hope that it will serve as an initial prototype to be improved upon, an example, although imperfect, that will inspire further archival endeavors in our field. So let's begin. The platform that we've adopted is actually called Omeka. It's an open source content management system which we were able to modify to suit our specific requirements, thanks to our IT expert, Pumra P. And what you are looking at right now in the next slide is the public-facing version of our digital archive, which is currently still under construction. As you can see, every artwork is identified by a unique accession number, like the archives, and this accession number captures several key pieces of information. So the first 4 digits of the accession number refer to the year in which the artwork was created. For example, the landscapes on this page were all from 1988. So moving on to the back end of Omeka, this is the page which allows us to edit the database. And from here on, I'll be using a familiar artwork untitled 14 October to explain the system. So as you can see, the accession number here begins with 4 zeros, which indicates that the artwork was not dated by Tang Chang himself. And we have other numeric codes for special cases, such as when multiple dates were inscribed on the artwork. And all these archival conventions are actually documented in this user manual, which can be made available upon request. So this user manual that we have also facilitates handovers between members of the team, ensuring that even if the lead researcher leaves the project, there will still be continuity and consistency in the way that artworks are documented. And back to the database. So the other crucial part of the accession number that I wanted to share about is the alphabetical category code at the end, which corresponds to the categories that the artwork is filed under. So this category code, CS, for this example, it actually contains 2 components. So the first letter indicates the type of material the artwork is made of, and the second letter indicates the subject matter. So actually categorizing the artworks by subject matter was quite a challenge given the stylistic diversity of Tang Chang's art and the multiple sources that he drew upon. We were compelled to examine the limits of conventional art historical terms in representing Tang Chang's practice and to ask, how might our use of language and archival convention shape, expand, or circumscribe the way the artwork is viewed and the discourses surrounding it? So to illustrate my point, let's look at an example. This watery painting by Tang Chang depicts a plant, it seems, in a sort of a round pot or bowl against this backdrop of repetitive, illegible markings. So the art historical term that comes to mind when we look at something like this is still life, a term which carries its own baggage, pointing to ideas of memento mori, to 17th century hierarchies of genre, or to the formal experiments of European modernists in the 20th century. But we need to ask, are these the traditions that we wish to situate Tang Chang in relation to? And in fact, when we look at other parts of the archive, such as the books Tang Chang collected, the texts he translated, and the other artists he looked up to, it becomes clear that his so-called still lives share affinities with other non-Western traditions. For example, paintings of fruits and vegetables by modern Chinese artists like Qi Baishi, and even the columns of pseudo-calligraphic text in the background of Tang Chang's painting remind us of the integral relationship between poetry and painting and the long history of Chinese art. And the simplified forms also could perhaps speak to a tradition of Chan Buddhist art by scholarly painters such as Bada Shanren. And in fact, we actually found a fragment of depicting some paintings by Bada Shanren in Tang Chang's archive of books. So a seemingly simple matter of categorization becomes a lot more complex when we consider how an artist like Tang Chang might have sought to relativize, to borrow John Clarke's term, to relativize multiple artistic traditions in developing his own personal idiom. So this is why we eventually settled on one of the more neutral terms, which hopefully is more neutral, figurative. So certain other terms were also translated from Thai phrases. Sorry, the clicker has some issues. Okay. Yeah, so for example, concrete poetry comes from Bot Kavi Rupatham, which Tang Chang himself used to refer to this group of works. And the category poem image comes from the phrase Bot Kavi Mi Pa Mi Bot Kavi, which was coined by Kuntip, Tang Chang's son and the heir of the estate when he was organizing the collection. And quite interestingly, this phrase that refers to poem image in Thai also corresponds to this Chinese idea of 画中有诗，诗中有画. Yeah, so that's another interesting connection that we could explore if we have more time. But yeah, so moving on from now, apart from these art historical questions. Sorry, the clicker is kind of... yeah, okay. So encoding certain information in the accession number also allowed us to perform a more empirical analysis of the collection. So I was able to download all the data from Omeka in the form of an Excel sheet, and then I could put it into a graph. Yeah. So you can see, for example, how many abstract works on paper there are in proportion to other categories. So this is just an example to show how this type of method can be applied to the medium, location, or even the size of the artwork as we seek to gain a more holistic understanding of the collection. And another key field that I wanted to highlight is the condition. So this field allows us to assess which works might be in need of conservation and to what degree, and also to document past conservation efforts, which may be helpful if further conservation is needed in the future. So in the case of this 8-meter-long diptych, Pat and I were able to note down our observations before and after the artwork underwent a 6-month live restoration at Bangkok Kunsthalle. Moving on, we've also documented the medium for each artwork. This consists of 2 components, the first being the mark-making medium. Sorry. Yeah, so the mark-making medium on the left, and then the material support on the right, such as glossy paper, cardboard, or canvas. So we were able to do some analysis, and one key takeaway was that the incredible stylistic and material diversity of the collection. So in fact, we recorded almost 200 different combinations of various media. And this shows us that as a self-taught artist, Tang Chang was unburdened by academic ideas about the hierarchy of different media, and he was extremely inventive in using whatever materials that he could find. Sorry, okay. So this portrait of Tang Chang's wife on the left is covered in a layer of crumpled perm papers, which she used to curl her hair. And the collection also includes numerous one-off experiments with unconventional materials, such as spray paint and sand, and with various printmaking techniques. And sometimes it was also difficult to determine what medium Tang Chang used exactly, because he was so adept in wielding his tools that a pen stroke might resemble a brush stroke. And this poster from the archive shows the thick markers that Tang Chang often used in his later years, which allowed him to sketch while walking around his neighborhood. So the inventory project was a very valuable opportunity to closely examine the materiality of Tang Chang's practice. And moving forward, I'm interested in how we can use this data to make sense of the artist's approach and the various artistic, social, and historical contexts that he was immersed in. For example, could the stylistic and material diversity of Tang Chang's work reflect his search for a method of no method, as theorized by the Ming Dynasty monk and painter Shi Tao? So this is one of the ideas that Dr. Inke will expound on later on. The next few sections of the database that I'm going to highlight will be especially useful for researchers in our field. These are the bibliography of printed matter and all known reproductions. Yeah, so after we had inventoried most of the artworks, we then reviewed all publications, including books, magazines, newspapers, journals, and articles, and so on, to track down specific references to Tang Chang's work. Pat has also provided English translations for the Thai materials, which we hope will benefit international researchers. And these materials are currently being documented under the archives, as Pat has already shared about. And we also documented the exhibition histories. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So this process of documenting the exhibition histories involved reviewing the materials the estate had meticulously preserved, including exhibition catalogs, brochures, postcards, and even maps. And the database also allows you to click on specific exhibitions. Yeah, so for example, this is a non-form, so when you click on it, you will see all the other artworks that were displayed in the same exhibition. And besides the exhibition history, we've also compiled annotations for selected works. This includes key quotations from the bibliography, as well as links to related artworks and archives. So as you can see here, we've linked several paintings which are similar in terms of subject matter, namely the depiction of Tang Chang with blank eye sockets, reflecting his horror at having witnessed the massacres of 1973 and 1976. And as for the related archival materials, this may include photos in which the artwork appears, such as in Tang Chang's home or in an exhibition, and also in magazines and journals. And finally, when you scroll to the bottom of the page of the database, you will find a number of keywords relating to the artwork. So these keywords are shared with the archives, and they function in a similar way to the index at the end of a book, which allows the reader to quickly locate other mentions of similar topics. And if you click on one of the keywords, for example, 14 October, you will be able to see other artworks tagged under the same keyword. So these interventions were our way of mapping the connections between artworks and archival materials. My hope was to capture how Tang Chang worked in series. That is, he rarely created isolated artworks, but was interested in exploring permutations and combinations of themes, techniques, or styles, often until he had exhausted all possibilities. So this is an example of one of the series that we identified. And in fact, linking the artworks together often helped us to estimate the year for artworks that were not signed or dated. For example, we could reasonably guess that the ink paintings shown here date to 1982, given their similarities to the artworks in this slide, which are dated and signed by the artist. So before I end this presentation, I would just like to share some of my reflections on the inventory project. As I've stressed throughout, collecting raw data is not raw data in the sense of information about artworks may not necessarily be useful in and of itself. And by defining the end goals of this inventory project in advance and working backwards, we can better design a system architecture that benefits the user, be it the team within the museum, which relies on the database to organize, store, and retrieve artworks, or the team or external parties such as researchers and art historians. The second point, which relates to the first, is the question of public accessibility. When I designed a database, I envisioned a resource that would be helpful for someone like me, someone trained in art history, conducting scholarly research. But what happens when the user is new to Tang Chang's work and wishes to explore or browse without searching for specific information? Can the database still represent the collection in a meaningful way that empowers the user to learn and be curious? And could public programs and events perhaps supplement this objective? The third point is that the inventory project is a work in progress. And despite our best efforts, there will always be gaps in the archive. For example, there are more than 140 artworks which we could not locate. And moreover, as we uncover more unexpected materials, we may need to revise the narratives that we have constructed. The database also has to be updated regularly to reflect changes to the status of artworks and other archival materials as they are exhibited, conserved, or relocated. To sum things up, Tang Chang's inventory project is really a long-term investment in preserving the legacy of an important artist for Thailand, for our region, Southeast Asia, for the Chinese diaspora, and really for the world. I'm honored to have been able to work on this project, which owes to the foresight of the estate, and I would like to thank everyone over the course of this journey who has helped us in one way or another. And before I leave, I just want to say a few words in Thai to thank the family. ฉันต้องขอบคุณคุณทิพย์คุณแนทคุณภูมิและทุกคนในครอบครัวของจังนะคะขอบคุณที่ดูแลฉันเหมือนเป็นคนในบ้านด้วยค่ะเป็นโชคดีของฉันที่ได้มาอยู่กับทุกคนที่นี่นะคะขอบคุณมากค่ะ Thank you
Thank you so much Cheryl and คุณออนพิมลนะคะ That's such a really insightful presentation and thank you for sharing us to look deeper in Tang Chang archives. So we now move to our first keynote speaker. Our first special one, Dr. Yin Kerr. Dr. Yin Kerr, an independent art historian whose work spans Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art, with significant contribution to both research and curatorial practice. Her keynote is titled Bringing into Play Tang Chang Herbs and Archive and Overture. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Yin Kerr on the stage, please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Dear teachers, friends and colleagues, thank you for being here this morning. I would like to thank the BACC and its team for hosting us, as well as the Tang Chang Private Museum for convening this symposium and the generous invitation. It is an immense delight and privilege to be back in Bangkok at this gathering of teachers and colleagues who have shaped Tang Chang's legacy in consequential ways. In the opening, Nawapu provided a succinct overview of the estate's inspiring vision. Cheryl and Peg next gave us a glimpse of the phenomenal project of the collection's documentation and database. My task, concluding the morning session, is to probe into the generation of new knowledge and research directions through the study of the artist's life, practice, and oeuvre, a task that is henceforth facilitated by the estate's inventory project. So over the next hour, I will revisit the research conducted on the estate's digital and physical collection for developing the curatorial conception of the exhibition Non-Forms, Tang Chang, 1934-1990, co-curated with Marcella Lister, head of Asia Pacific and the New Media Department. Non-Forms was held at the Centre Pompidou in Paris from October 2023 to April 2024. It will serve as my point of departure to elaborate on findings that point to fresh ways of seeing, experiencing, thinking about, and theorizing Tang Chang's works. Against the context of this exhibition, my foray into Tang Chang was tied to my mandate as adjunct curator to develop the Centre Pompidou's collection of Southeast Asian modern and contemporary art through acquisition, research, and outreach. While I did not approach the estate as an independent art historian in 2022, my methodology and vision remained fundamentally art historical as per my academic training. So once plans for a solo exhibition in conjunction with an acquisition project supported by the Amis du Centre Pompidou concretized in early 2023, the systematic examination of Tang Chang's oeuvre and archive in the spirit of a monographic study began with the estate's generous assistance. The motivations, objectives, and methods of this approach have been discussed in Baji Ongso and Tang Chang, research strategies on two maverick modernist painters from Myanmar and Thailand compared. I will apply or expand on the arguments therein as pertinent. Two questions. A survey of Tang Chang's artworks and archival materials was indispensable in spite of the short space of time of barely 6 months. The exhibition's curatorial strategy, not to mention the articulation of opposite interpretations and methodologies, depended on it. Hence, the twofold objective of examining the estate's digital and physical collection of works and documents from the late 1950s to 1980s was to discern means of complicating Tang Chang's practice within the prevailing framework of abstraction on the one hand and dilating the perception of his oeuvre and practice beyond the scheme on the other hand. So the aim was not to establish an inventory or the artist's biography, but the elucidation of two series of questions. The first was how a solo exhibition of Tang Chang at the Centre Pompidou at the juncture of 2023 might be meaningful beyond the artist's canonization through the institution's prestigious standing. Numerous exhibitions featuring Tang Chang had already been staged in and outside of Thailand, and very outstanding ones too. So what might still merit the art world's interest and time? By meaningful, I had in mind advancing the artist's legacy as well as the nascent histories of 20th century Southeast Asian art by expanding the spectrum of perspectives through which his oeuvre might be theorized. International exhibitions of Tang Chang in the past decade mainly featured his monochromatic canvas and paper works from the 1960s and 1970s, which have been compared to the Gutai, action painting, gestural abstraction, or abstract expressionism. His Rupadharma poems, popularized as concrete poetry, many of which are charged with political and social content, were often displayed alongside. Once in a while, a color landscape painting on paper made an appearance in a group exhibition or an auction, but the former canvas format, viscous marine paint resembling oil or acrylic paint, and expressive non-representational mode of expression were what boosted his market value and sealed his art historical significance. This inclination towards the non-figurative was already patent in the exhibitions organized by Tang Chang himself in Thailand since the 1960s and into the 1980s. In an interview, he even specified that his abstract paintings were his most important works. But does this abstraction sum up his practice and oeuvre? Taking into account what had been exhibited in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Singapore, Seoul, Tokyo, Berlin, and Chicago, and how the exhibited materials had been framed till then, which works and documents might offer purposeful motifs to next weave into the tapestry that is Tang Chang's legacy? In view of the modest exhibition space of 50 square meters at the Centre Pompidou and an international audience sharing few spiritual, cultural, artistic, and intellectual references with the artist, a rigorous curatorial direction was required to steer a succinct selection. This first question seeks resolution in tandem with the second one on Tang Chang's exceptionality. Apart from the iconic monochromatic non-figurative paintings executed in his youth from his mid-20s to mid-30s, what other works might be worthy of our attention? If these paintings were truly the heart and apex of Tang Chang's practice, what preceded or came after? These paintings did not emanate from nothingness. There had to be a genesis. After the 1960s, what did Tang Chang paint in parallel to his Rupadharma poems? What recurrent themes pervaded his entire practice over 4 decades, and what turning points were there? Given that Tang Chang received no formal education, what nourished his aesthetic and poetic vision? What did he read and study on his own? What did he exchange ideas? Who did he exchange ideas with, and on what? The fact that the vast majority of Tang Chang's archives and surviving works, nearing 9,000, are under one roof dispense with the task of tracking down multiple dispersed collections. That Kun Tep began organizing Tang Chang's works and archival documents according to type and year as soon as his father passed away had led to a palpably navigable collection. In addition, a selection of materials had been documented by Mary Pangsanga and David Tay with Haus der Kulturen der Welt's support. Not all works and documents are dated, but the vast majority is, and this appreciably facilitated the construal of a historical timeline. The precision and magnitude of the inventory project's periodical charts has since been a game changer for scrupulous art historical research. The collection's unraveling in 2023 was nevertheless partial. The time that I disposed of was not commensurate with the vastness of the estate's collection that is a veritable Aladdin's cave. Over and above what I was proficient at assessing sources in simplified Chinese, I relied on translations for sources in Thai. I was only able to skim through published titles of Tang Chang's sizable corpus of writings in Thai, many of which have been studied by Nawapu, Kenji, and other fellow colleagues whom we will hear this afternoon. Within these parameters, the inaugural research yielded three motifs that inform the curatorial conception and selection of works for the exhibition. First is the synthesis of calligraphy and painting, of word and image in Tang Chang's practice, followed by the plenitude of color, and lastly, the dilemma of form. Before concluding today, I will attempt the question of what defines the thinkable and the seen, and why it might be a pertinent question with respect to theorizing Tang Chang's practice and oeuvre. So the first part, writing images, painting poetry. Based on surviving works and the documentation of lost ones, Tang Chang's non-figurative monochromatic drawings and paintings are either in marine paint or canvas or black pen and ink on paper. The non-figurative works in color are mostly in felted pen, gouache, watercolor, or poster paint on paper. The representational paintings include monochromatic and color works on both canvas and paper. The latter consists of landscapes, genre scenes, animals, Buddhist and Taoist superior beings, what is commonly referred to as still lifes, portraits, and self-portraits. Tang Chang's earliest known works from the 1950s and early 1960s that preceded or overlapped with his iconic paintings demonstrate a variety of styles and subject matter. They range from naturalistic landscapes to modernist expressions in the Cubist idiom, hyperrealistic portraits, and Chinese ink paintings. The latter two categories, portraits and ink paintings, are the most significant in quantity. The highly realistic portraits created in the name of Hui Min's portrait studio were clearly of a commissioned nature. The small-scale Chinese ink paintings of the Hua Niao Hua and Shan Shui Hua genres in the Chinese pictorial tradition depict flora and birds and landscapes respectively. They resemble exercises unintended for display, while the now lost monumental paintings featuring landscapes and Buddhist superior beings of the Renwu Hua genre were mostly donated to the Tianfa Foundation Hospital in Bangkok. These photorealistic portraits that we saw just now, rooted in verisimilitude of the classical Western pictorial tradition on the one hand, and Chinese ink paintings of the Xie Yi tradition on the other hand, demonstrates Tang Chang's precocious stylistic and technical versatility as early as his 20s. Preceding them is surely another body of works of which we have no trace, but what this partial insight into Tang Chang's beginnings does reveal is that his subsequent disinterest in the realist pictorial tradition in spite of his extraordinary proficiency. In his acclaimed non-figurative paintings, which have won over, the slides have not moved automatically, which have won over many a curator, dealer, and collector, there is no trace of the meticulous rendering seen in his portraits. Conversely, Chinese ink painting of the Xie Yi tradition, which focuses on transmitting the subject's spirit, essence, vitality, or energy, not the fastidious Gongbi style intent on replicating every minutiae on paper, prevailed. At first glance, this observation might seem mistaken. So, where is the mountain, goddess, or goldfish in these paintings? Bearing in mind Tang Chang's familiarity with the Chinese script, his grounding in Chinese ink painting, and his immersion in Chinese literature and art, as evinced by his notable collection of publications on these topics, the examination of numerous non-figurative works on both paper and canvas suggests that it is not what is represented, but the units and principles of image making in Chinese art that made their way into his non-representational works in the 1960s and even beyond. I shall first address the more tangible units of the Chinese script and image. On one level, it can be understood that Tang Chang, who wrote and read widely in Chinese, amplified the individual components of the Chinese script that constitute each of the 6 types of Chinese characters to make them the protagonist of each painting. In his non-representational paintings, we identify transformations of the simple strokes that make up the compound strokes of each Chinese character, like the dot, the horizontal, the vertical, the rise, the left falling, the right falling, the turn, the hook, the clockwise curve, and the anti-clockwise curve. Whether he used the brush, his hand, or his body as an instrument to move paint across the canvas, he can be understood as using it to trace disembodied units of the Chinese script as does a brush. From this perspective, his works are more specifically calligraphic, not merely gestural or intentionally devoid of all references to forms, in reality in the spirit of abstraction. On another level, Tang Chang can be understood as making improvisations on the brushstrokes employed in Chinese painting and calligraphy. So this is moving a bit too fast. Sorry. Can I go back to... Yeah. By improvisation, I refer to his endeavor to create structure and texture by way of specific strokes, and the force and thrust of each stroke as in Chinese ink painting. We have witnessed his proficiency in Chinese ink painting, and he was no stranger to Chinese calligraphy either. His father wrote couplets and letters for the illiterate at a local temple, and he was sufficiently fascinated by the theoretical aspects of calligraphy to acquire numerous Chinese publications on Chinese script and calligraphy alongside Chinese poetry. During the 1950s and even earlier on, when he was assimilating the various categories of Chinese ink painting ranging from flora and birds and the human figure to landscape, he surely learned the techniques loosely translated as the Bon method, whether from a teacher, from books, or through personal study. While there is as yet no evidence that Tang Chang read about this method, which is the second of the 6 principles of Chinese painting from Xie He's The Record of the Classification of Old Painters from the 6th century, these principles have pervaded Chinese ink painting with variations in interpretation and application as per the different schools of painting over the course of 1.5 millennium and constitute the cornerstone of Chinese linear art. Now, you may wonder why I am dissecting what I identify as Tang Chang's calligraphic bravura using theory from painting. While painting can be an independent pursuit in itself in Chinese art, it is one with painting, and it has been thus since at least the 9th century, when minister, calligraphy, painter, and theorist Zhang Yanyuan propounded the same brush method in calligraphy and painting. Indeed, it is the same method, same medium of brush and ink, and technique of strokes for writing and painting in Chinese ink painting. A century later, in the Book of Tang, poetry was added, advocating that painting, calligraphy, and poetry be practiced concomitantly as the 3 perfections. As such, with respect to Tang Chang, for whom text, or the semblance of it, complements and completes the image, who practiced poetry and painting as a combined endeavor in his Rupadharma poems, and has been no less well known as a poet in Thailand's literary world, there is every reason to posit that Chinese art not only provided him with the practical and theoretical knowledge of image making, but also forged his paradigm paradigm of artistic practice whereby painting, calligraphy, and poetry are concomitant. It is certainly possible that Tang Chang had come across reproductions of concrete poetry, visual poetry, pattern poetry, or calligrams from ancient or modern Europe or the Americas at some point in his life, as he did the many Taoist talismans and Buddhist yantras, likewise combining word and image, which respectively pervade the Taoist and Theravada Buddhist worlds. To date, at least, there is no evidence that he studied modern Western art and culture to the same extent as he did classical Chinese art and culture, especially during the first 2 decades of his career in the 1950s and 1960s, much less concrete poetry. His handful of sketches and paintings referencing works by Picasso and Van Gogh pale in comparison to the number of works inspired by Chinese painting. As a matter of fact, he relied mostly on Chinese publications to access Western art, literature, and culture. The inventory project has revealed that it was especially in the 1970s and 1980s that he deepened his acquaintance with Western art through correspondence with fellow artists living in Europe and Northern America like Kamol Tassananchali and Somyot Hananuntasu. Given Tang Chang's constant references to Buddhism and Chinese culture, I argue that it is more likely that his experimentations on word and image in these poems evolved from his familiarity with the Chinese script. For example, pictograms whereby images function as word and simple ideograms are assembled to create compound ideograms. To begin with, Tang Chang's choice of the Pali word Rupadharma to designate these poems leaves no doubt about their conception's spiritual and philosophical backdrop. His reticence on the use of the English term concrete poetry in European publications to refer to his Rupadharma poems means neither objection nor wholehearted approval. A Pali term taken from Theravada Buddhist discourse to refer to material phenomena or physical objects perceived through the senses, in contrast to the term Namadharma referring to the mental aspects. Rupadharma is charged with overtones obscured by the generic term concrete poetry. It is true that the meaning of Pali words can shift in Thai. If I pronounce it correctly, it's Bot Kavi Rupadham. In this case, whose literal translation is concrete poetry. But for Tang Chang, who knew Pali, I doubt he used the Pali term in an unmindful manner. Indeed, this word arguably makes known his focus on the material world of form in these works. Now, most of these then deplore the political tragedies and social injustices of this earthly realm and feature other more or less favorable mundane occurrences, with only 10% of them featuring philosophical and spiritual topics close to his heart. Returning to Tang Chang's monochromatic, non-representational works on paper and canvas, chronologically, their emergence and apogee fall between his initiation to the alliance between word and image in the 1950s and his increasing melding of word and image in his Rupadharma poems from the late 1960s onwards. I argued earlier on that Tang Chang made the strokes of Chinese script and brushwork the protagonist in these works. That is, the word, or rather, its component or components is the image. The next question is whether these iconic works bespeak a breakthrough in Tang Chang's practice in his shift in interest from the integration of calligraphy and painting to the fusion of word and image. After he ceased to paint non-representational works on canvas in the early 1970s, the fusion of word and image became his new direction in other areas of his creative practice. In the earliest phase was the visual arrangement of word and space to create identifiable forms in his Rupadharma poems. The repetition of phrases or a single word, Thai word for human in most instances, would structure a representation, an object, an animal, a house, so on and so forth. By the late 1970s, Tang Chang went a step further to not only seek unified harmony between word and image within a single pictorial frame, but also to coalesce word and image. Indeed, Tang Chang engaged in experimentations on word and image into the last decade of his life in the 1980s to the point of them becoming undifferentiated. As can be seen in numerous self-portraits whereby a single sinogram, or rather what appears to be such, structures the composition, the ambiguity between word and image, between the representational and the non-representational, between the semantically void and charged, peaks to make way for a liminal space in which attempts at interpretation can be as infinite as they are unavailing. The transposition between word and image is complete at this point. In at least two sketches featuring a tortoise, a sacred animal symbolizing many a thing, including the universe in Taoism, Tang Chang went as far as to combine the sinograms for sacred or sage and scripture in the manner of He Wen, a form of legation combining two or more sinograms going back as far as the Shang dynasty from 3,500 years ago, suggesting that he was way ahead in either his theoretical study of the Chinese script or his pictorial experimentations on the myriad configurations of word and image. In other words, legible text gives a way to the semblance of text taking on the form of calligraphic displays. Emptied of linguistic and semantic content, what was text now serves a purely pictorial function that is nonetheless an essential component of a painting, as is any stroke in a sinogram. I end this first part on Tang Chang's duets of calligraphy and painting of word and image with what I reckon to be his most consummate rendition of this motif in his oeuvre. From what began as relics of calligraphic rendering void of meaning in the 1960s, a consequential series of configurations of various forms and textures executed in a range of dimensions, media, and colors emerged over the next 2 decades into the 1980s. I interpret this development to be the result of Tang Chang's assimilation of what Xie He theorized as the fifth principle on division and planning and positioning and arrangement in Chinese painting. Not only is the principle applied to the forms depicted, but the position and proportions of the inscription as well, including his signature in relation to the former and the unfilled space. What follows is its purposeful transformation in the spirit of Shi Tao's Know method, unrestrained by knowledge, which, sorry, this is going a bit too fast. Okay. Which Tang Chang surely knew since he translated the Chinese monk painter and calligrapher's book into Thai. Focusing on the task of planning and arranging text and image within a pictorial frame, Tang Chang gradually divested words of script and meaning on the one hand and images of representation on the other hand. And what remains are cadence, juxtapositions of form and texture, divulging force, thrust of the stroke and movement, and sometimes color floating in an otherworldly space. Some see topographical features, others see constellations. Abstraction is probably the most anodyne verdict, but it is as adequate or inadequate as the term poetry, dharma, or Tao. What is certain is that Tang Chang did not use the word rupa dharma on these animatic renditions to imply that they are of material phenomena. The conjecture that there was more to be seen and known that could reconfigure Tang Chang's artistic exceptionality within the confines of abstraction or shift it beyond was not uncalled for. His imposing 1973 self-portrait, which had been widely circulated in print and is probably still the most prized of his entire collection, has been the white elephant in the projection room, replaying images of Tang Chang, the monochromatic abstractionist garbed in black or white. This venerated self-portrait, marking a turning point in Tang Chang's artistic and literary practice, ruptures the predominant narrative in at least two ways. First, Tang Chang used color, and he used it abundantly and consummately. Second, he was a prolific self-portraitist and one who drew on a plethora of media, styles, and techniques to chronicle the shifts in his mind and physique. Not only is he not a non-figurative painter in the exclusive sense, he cannot be categorized under any one style. For art historians conditioned to expect artistic maturity and distinction as necessarily characterized by the exclusive espousal of one style, these variegated and stylistically diverse self-portraits in the 700s resembling the work of multiple painters understandably stupefied. Could this stupefaction, due to the lack of conceptual apparatuses, have led to these self-portraits' omission in the stories told about Tang Chang? It was not until 2020 that Annette Sui's MA thesis titled Beyond the Mirror, Tang Chang's Self-Portraits as Anti-Canonical Resistance and the Academia's Blind Eye to His Self-Portraits. The interpretation and theorization of Tang Chang's stylistic multiplicity as well as his transposition between representation and abstraction merit further thought. Before that, based on my perfunctory survey of the estate's collection conducted in 2023, I shall synthesize observations of color's abiding appeal to Tang Chang. His manuscripts and publications must, however, be scrutinized to arrive at a fuller comprehension of the way he understood colors and used them. Amongst the works in colors, most of which date to the 1980s, are portraits, self-portraits with calligraphic highlights in accent colors, landscapes in bands of bold hues, streets, constructions, and trees structured by color and texture, potted plants, birds, and fishes in shades ranging from the subtlest to the very luminous, and undetermined forms demonstrating all of the above chromatic and technical strategies. Most of these works are in a water-based medium on paper with paint applied in impasto as well as in washes. These colors can resemble those in nature, but it is not always so. In most instances, color does not only fill form, but also functions as line to define form with strokes that can be similarly traced back to the bone method seen in earlier works from the 1960s and early 1970s. One Rupa Dharma poem in full color in felt tip pen was also identified in 2023, with more in water-based media inventoried recently. The most instructive document known to date on the way Tang Chang thought about color is a personalized color table with the tonal values of 23 colors whose names are handwritten in English and Chinese. It suggests that his use of colors was not haphazard. His early works point to his adeptness in using colors since the very beginning of his career. Given that he used marine paint brought home by his wife from the harbor to paint his most acclaimed non-figurative paintings during the 1960s, his limited palette in black, white, red, and blue from this period is probably due to the limitations in materials. He used whatever was available. It should be clarified that it was not necessarily his assiduity as a student of Chinese ink painting that held him back from using color. The application of color, including layers, value, and tone, is foregrounded in the fourth of Xie He's 6 principles, although plain ink has been the Chinese literatis' predilection in their withdrawal from the kaleidoscopic secular world. Austrian-born art historian Ernst Gombrich defined style as the following. Style is any distinctive and therefore recognizable way in which an act is performed or an artifact made or ought to be performed and made. As anachronistic as this citation on style from 1968 might seem against the context of modern and contemporary art discourse on a Sino-Thai artist, I argue that style has been a matter of consequence in Tang Chang's success. It is what made him distinctive and esteemed as deserving of international interest, for style embodies values, if not philosophies. Abstract expressionism being branded as, quote, a distinctly American style, end quote, by New York's Museum of Modern Art and perceived as the ultimate expression of freedom against conservatism in a climate of Cold War politics. Comparisons made between Tang Chang and this style based on his 1960s paintings' morphological characteristics alone are consequential. Arguably, the coupling put him on a par with the free world's artist heroes and boosted his visibility and intelligibility in the Euro-American art world. In the light of the works selected for international exhibitions and acquisition by public institutions, the baptism of Tang Chang as an exponent of abstract expressionism or action painting, whose diversion was concrete poetry, seemed absolute and unequivocal, even if the same curators might question the validity of this stylistic association and terminology. I argue that as much as this fixation on style has boosted Tang Chang's international renown, it has operated as a false premise and a distraction from his actual practice. It is not only because there is in truth nothing distinctly American about his practice and oeuvre. The briefer survey of the estate's collection revealed other facets of his practice that are at variance with the dominant account of Tang Chang the abstractionist. First, not only did he begin with the figurative painting in the 1940s, but he returned to it during the last decade of his life in the 1980s. His most well-known mimetic works span little more than a decade, from the late 1950s to the early 1970s, corresponding to the only one amongst other episodes in his illustrious practice. Second, rather than modern Western art's tools of thought like style and its vocabulary such as abstraction, as I have demonstrated, it is the principles of Chinese painting conceived and practiced in tandem with calligraphy and poetry that offer the keys to explicate the rationale behind his non-mimetic paintings. In point of fact, I posit that the fundamental reason for abstraction's limitations as a lens for interpreting these works is the marginality of style in his approach to image making. The role played by style in his international acclaim and the place of style in his actual practice are not to be conflated. It is precisely the reason for the plethora of styles adopted in his self-portraits, without any observable evolution geared towards the perfection of one single style. To clarify this postulation, which contradicts the mainstream construct of an imperatively linear and one-tracked artistic development culminating in stylistic homogeneity, as epitomized by the careers of abstractionists like Vasily Kandinsky or Piet Mondrian, moving from figuration towards the purity of form, a comparison with Tang Chang's peer across the border in Myanmar, Baji Ongso, who similarly passed away in 1990, is illuminating. Like Tang Chang, Ongso demonstrated a remarkable stylistic virtuosity. In Ongso's case, this shared uncustomary trait is explained by the teachings of his Indian guru from Shantiniketan, Nandala Bose, who argues that art is first and foremost a form of communication in the ambit of the cultural and social. Based on the premise of art as language, technical and stylistic diversity amounts to what he called linguistic versatility. The measure of a competent artist is hence the capacity, quote, to face situations creatively without being obsessed with self-expression, end of quote. He or she must, quote, be resourceful enough to express visually all that can be known and experienced, end of quote. And this is only achievable if he or she is competent in a wide range of media, techniques, and styles. Adherence to a single style of self-expression is thus perceived as a handicap, not an accomplishment. Back to Tang Chang. There is thus far no indication that he ever caught wind of Nanda Boss's teachings from Rabindranath Tagore's University in India or even heard of Ongso. Yet it is the same commitment to facing each creative situation resourcefully that spawned this impressive corpus of self-portraits. In other words, what was painstakingly woven into a pedagogical program in India against a wider project aimed at relativizing modern Western artistic traditions and trends and neutralizing their hegemony. What Ongso assimilated intellectually before putting into practice systematically, Tang Chang appeared to have understood intuitively and practiced artlessly. For Tang Chang, the fundamental matter in question is his understanding of form, which cannot be partitioned and confined within modern Western art's stylistic grid. In a mind mirroring Buddhist and Taoist credos, form is a tributary of matter interlocked with mind in a dynamic binary system. The forms created are first and foremost tokens of his mind, his breath, and his vitality or qi in a state of being devoted to spiritual transformation. This is what he repeated in speech and writing numerous times. Within this worldview, form and non-form are not antithetical and neither are representational art and what we call abstraction. His focus would be on being one with the body and mind in the present moment in the act of moving the medium across the support, not premeditating a specific morphological outcome. To be sure, the last piece of puzzle are Taoism and Buddhism that were the lighthouse in Tang Chang's life and art. He spoke and wrote extensively on his application of Taoist and Buddhist teachings to daily life, as well as his creative practice, especially in the form of meditation and breathing techniques prior to as well as during the creative act. He also translated the Tao Te Ching attributed to Lao Tzu into Thai and even wrote a book comparing Taoism and Buddhism. In his creative practice, these breathing techniques associated with mental cultivation translate into the movement of strokes in his painting on the one hand and the repetition of a single word in his Rupadharma poems on the other hand. The former corresponds to the expression of his vitality as do movements in martial arts such as Tai Chi, while the latter is both the means and expression of stilling the mind to develop single-pointed concentration known as ekagata in Pali, a prerequisite to the cultivation of wisdom in Buddhist practice. Both before and after his monochromatic non-figurative period, there are numerous citations of Buddhist and Taoist precepts or representations of their superior beings in his drawings, paintings, and poems. While Tang Chang's appreciation and practice of Mahayana Buddhism in relation to Theravada Buddhism remains unclear, he was sufficiently initiated to the former to be motivated to paint the superior beings embodying his teachings, including those of Chan Buddhism, whose acquaintance was slightly enhanced through Shi Tao's influence. Tang Chang's leitmotif of the Thai and Chinese words meaning human in his Rupadharma poems can moreover be interpreted as an expression of his constant contemplation on what is at the heart of Taoist ethics. What does it mean to be a virtuous human being living in harmony with the universe, and how so? As early as 1992, Apinam Poshananda wrote on the abstraction practiced by Thai artists like Tang Chang and Pratwang M. Jaroen in the same breath as Buddhism, suggesting that beneath this seemingly identical visual properties of abstraction are distinct motivations, processes, and aims. Now, while Tang Chang irrefutably affirmed his practice of abstract art, he did not use the English word abstraction, but the Thai word namatam to mean abstraction instead. It is made up of two Pali terms, nama meaning the mind and associated notions of sensation and perception, for example, and dhamma. The emphasis is on the mind as the work of art's substance, rather than the absence or rejection of forms with correspondences in reality, as in the abstraction practiced by the masters of modern Western art. In point of fact, there is to date no evidence that Tang Chang understood abstraction's formal bias in the history of modern Western art, along with the ideals that it embodied. This shift in focus from form to mind is, in my opinion, the crux to the question on Tang Chang's artistic excellence. In the language of Theravada Buddhism, it is matter in favor of mind, the mundane in favor of ultimate reality. Within the Taoist paradigm, it is the ultimate reality underlying the phenomenal world's transformations. In other words, overriding formal attributes of mimesis or abstraction and all other forms of appearances in Tang Chang's lyrical and spiritual perception of the world nourished by Buddhist and Taoist teachings. Within this worldview, his attention is on the mind's betterment in harmony with the universe in which it inhabits. The antithesis between mimesis and abstraction that has been a signpost in discourse on modern Western art is immaterial, since it is the artist's mind and vitality transmitted to the forms he creates that is of the essence. Admittedly, if there is any binary in Tang Chang's practice, it is that of mind and matter, or nama and rupa as known to Tang Chang, not the polarity between representational and non-representational art, or between word and image. This explains his concurrent recourse to representation and the non-figurative, the legible and the unintelligible, as well as their transposition. They were not perceived as contradictory and incompatible. It matters not whether it's a landscape painting, a topographical rendering, or unidentified forms emerging and disintegrating in Tang Chang's mind as do clouds in the sky. Tao and Dharma are not dissociated from the humdrum of daily life, but the terrain on which the latter unfolds. A non-dual vision in which light and darkness maintain each other's equilibrium. Indeed, echoing the 10 ox-herding pictures on the stages of enlightenment in Chan Buddhism, whereby the path to awakening is about coming full circle from observing that mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers in the beginning, to transcending their form to know their true nature, and finally coming to see that they are truly the mountains and rivers that they are. Tang Chang's works, perhaps in sync with his personal practice in the 1980s, exhibit a return to the world, a state in which ultimate and mundane realities are seamlessly wielded. From the monumental non-mimetic paintings of the 1960s, he returned to embrace the sublunary ordinariness of daily life. The potted plants, his cats, his neighborhood, on small pieces of paper, as if this secular dimension were the most fertile terrain for exercising the highest wisdom and compassion. From the Taoist point of view, it can be understood as the spirit's consummation with heaven and earth. Hence, by discerning what I understood to be the singularity of Tang Chang's practice, and considering how his works had been previously curated and discoursed on, the curatorial strategy of non-form was decided upon for the 2023 exhibition at the Centre Pompidou. The title non-form served to disrupt the terminological and conceptual conditioning of reading form as either representational or abstract, to signal the shift away from form bias approach yoked to modern Western art's table of styles, and to hint at the substantiality of the seemingly absurd logic of Buddhism and Taoism that was Tang Chang's lifeline. Language creates predetermined pathways, determines what is thinkable and what is not, and shapes perception. The same is true of art historical methods. While the modern Western construct of art had provided Tang Chang with the platform to exercise his creative faculties, the formulation of his intent and content are located in systems beyond the modernism shaped by a European experience. Tang Chang's reality in Thailand was a far cry from Paris or New York. If the trajectory that led Tang Chang to create his best-known non-objective paintings is not comparable to that of the modern and contemporary Western masters of abstraction, if abstraction as it is understood in modern Western art history is not the most efficient conceptual model to deciphering Tang Chang's practice, it is the application of language, conceptual tools, and methodological frameworks loaned from what energized him that might more scrupulously articulate his practice and oeuvre and define his art historical significance with greater accuracy. As previously accounted for, it is the principles and techniques of Chinese art such as He's principles and their subsequent avatars in the history of Chinese painting that provide a coherent clarification of his practice and works. As such, in lieu of theories of abstraction defined by modern Western art, how about interpreting and theorizing Tang Chang's works and practice through Shi Tao's theoretical works, for example? How about making sense of his self-portraits in light of the tradition of self-portraiture in classical Chinese painting? The application of methodological tools loaned from Chinese philosophy, art, and language that were his poetic imagination's bedrock can even be extended to the theorization of his construct of the artist. His political engagement through disengagement can be likewise traced to the tenet of Wu Wei from Taoism, loosely translated as non-action or effortless action, his deliberate reclusion, his fierce preservation of autonomous thought and action away from the establishment, his practice of art and literature as a means of spiritual betterment as per Taoist and Buddhist teachings, and most importantly, his reluctance to insert his creative output in the market system all place him closer to the model of the Chinese literati artist than the modern professional artist, with a production geared towards audiences of an art world that is nolens volens, fueled by dollars and cents. The challenge for us is therefore to assemble relevant tools of thought and expression to devise a methodological device that is free to enter and exit the modern European construct of art, which is neither universal nor perennial. For this reason, at a deeper level, the purpose of examining the estate's collection of works and documents was to infer from them clues to devise more precise apparatuses of language and conceptual and methodological tools attuned to the artist's contexts and ambitions. Which paradigms nourish Tang Chang's intellectual, spiritual, poetic, and artistic imagination, and what conceptual and methodological tools might be derived thereof? If Tang Chang was not proficient in English, which Chinese or Thai words and expressions steered his thought and action, and which English words might least distort or even eviscerate his exceptionality? This need for a tailor-made linguistic, conceptual, and methodological toolbox is particularly pertinent for a self-taught artist like Tang Chang, who was relatively immune to the establishment's models of modern art replicating the Western canon. He was certainly aware of modern Western art. He read up on it and he interacted with his contemporaries who had assimilated it, but he had accesses to sources beyond it, and evidence suggests that he was way more inclined towards them. What is modern to the modern academic and curator of modern and contemporary art could well be a page taken from an ancient manual, as did Tang Chang, Shi Tao's writings. As such, knowledge of the artist's sources of inspiration is imperative. More specifically are words or concepts used by Tang Chang, such as what is translated as the mind in English, which also means the heart in Chinese, or key notions in Taoism like 真行, translated as true form. In the case of Tang Chang's writings in Thai, there is in addition the complexity of his translation from Chinese into Thai. The Thai word kon translated into English as people or human in the 2023 exhibition, that is the most recurrent word in his Rupa Dharma poems, for example, is particularly worthy of interest. Was Tang Chang thinking in Thai when he used this word, or was he also thinking in Chinese? The philosophical implications of the Chinese word 人 are profound and profuse. In David Tay's curatorial essay for his exhibition Misfits, pages from a loose leaf modernity featuring Tang Chang, Baji Angsu from Myanmar, and Rox Lee from the Philippines in Berlin in 2017, he asked, quote, could we follow their strides away from figuration without recourse to abstract expressionism, end quote. The means to adapt and to devise more congruous terminology and conceptual and methodological apparatuses are in sight. And perhaps since 1968, when Mayura Visekul cited Tang Dynasty poet Wang Wei to read and visualize Tang Chang's Rupadharma poems in the English edition of Tang Chang's self-published black cover. The question is, what will it take to see through these possibilities? In my conclusion here, the findings presented in the past 55 minutes are merely the tip of the iceberg, just as the works that made Tang Chang's name on both national and international platforms are of his oeuvre. Much has come to be since 2023, with the substantial data made accessible by the highly commendable Inventory Project, a first in the region which will hopefully inspire others. The estate's physical and digital collections' real contribution to the history of Thai art, Southeast Asian art, and global art will depend on at least two factors. First is whether curators, students, and scholars actually commit to extracting insights from it by way of making sense of it in its totality, or at least by connecting some of the many dots in the constellation that it is. This procedure is not to be confused with piecemeal extractions deployed to serve preconceived and extrinsic arguments and theses, whose priorities lies in theoretical discourse and as an end in itself. It is my opinion that a robust art historical narrative begins with seeing the works and reading the archival documents before language, concepts, and methods that are congruous with their contexts may be devised and developed accordingly. Indeed, this was how the discipline of the study of art that we claim to practice first began, however primitively and imperfectly, with stories of artists and their works. As of today, the knowledge of artists and art in our region is not necessarily more advanced than that presented in Giorgio Vasari's lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects in 16th century Italy. If we have not even gotten to writing histories of individual artists that are the building blocks of histories of art, how is it possible to be writing critical histories? How many 20th century Thai, Southeast Asian, and Asian artists still only exist in random publications, reproductions, and laudatory blurbs recycled from promotional printed matter? Second is whether specialists from different disciplines equipped with different skill sets can come together to work as a team to decipher Tang Chang's multiplex practice. Western modernism is only a piece of this intricate puzzle, which also includes Thai and Chinese language and literature, Chinese philosophy, painting and calligraphy, and Buddhist practice. The concepts, theories, and methodologies of modern and contemporary Western art are the fruits of half a millennium of trial and error and debate within specific intellectual, cultural, and historical climates. They can either be scrutinized, filtered, and critically adapted and applied to the recent phenomena of artistic practices and productions in this part of the world, or they can be embraced as universal and regurgitated without discrimination. In putting to test a spectrum of tools of thought beyond modern Western art history's premises and conventions to elucidate Tang Chang's practice and oeuvre, I seek to circumvent the constraints and even distortions ensuing their routine execution with faint consideration for contextual distinctiveness. My purpose is not to invalidate Western modern and contemporary discourse, which remains the art world's lingua franca. There is no reversing the status quo for as long as we remain on this stage called art. Nonetheless, if Tang Chang's artistic exceptionality is to be seen for what it is, the relativization of the modern Western construct of art is necessary. Its conceptual, theoretical, and methodological arsenal yoked to colonization and imperialism are inevitably limited by its relatively short history and can only benefit from interchanges with millennia-old creative practices from across the world. In this way, it is hopefully possible to complicate and dilate discourse on this creature called art beyond the lenses of modern Euro-America and chart new pathways for thinking about and seeing its multifarious avatars, of which Tang Chang is a formidable example. Thank you very much for your time and patience.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yin Kerr, for this evocative keynote. She bringing Tang Chang oeuvres and archive for us into and opening new ways for us to engage with them.